The moment I stood up to give my unscheduled toast, and saw the look of sheer animal panic in my husband's eyes as he stared at the beautiful, much younger woman sitting beside him. That was the first time in 54 years I had ever truly stolen the spotlight from him. And it was glorious. Hi everyone, I'm Grandma Lillian. My name is Lillian Ainsworth. I am 80 years old, and for the past 2 years my home has been here, in a quiet apartment in the sky. Though, for my entire life before that, my home, my heart, my whole world was a beautiful, rambling old house in Charleston, South Carolina. A house that I helped build, a house that I loved, and a house that I loved, and a house that I, in the end, burned to the ground. Metaphorically speaking, of course. This story, my goodness, this is a secret I have held in my heart like a burning coal. It is the story of a 54-year marriage, a 20-year lie, and a single explosive moment of truth. My own children, my dear beloved children, were there that night. They saw the explosion. But they still do not fully understand the geology of the volcano that erupted. They know their father was a cheat. They know their family was torn apart. They do not know that I was the one who lit the fuse. There is a particular kind of shame, you see, that is reserved for the wronged wife. The shame of being a cliché. The shame of the woman who didn't know. You are looked upon with a terrible, pitying kindness. And in that pity, you begin to question everything. You question your own intelligence, your own intuition, your own worth. You become an object of sympathy, and in doing so, you begin to lose yourself. His betrayal becomes the story, and your entire life becomes nothing more than the sad, quiet prelude to it. But I am telling my story now because I am done with being a prelude. I am done with the shame. I have learned that the only thing more powerful than a rich man's lie is a quiet woman's truth. And I am telling it for any woman or any man who has ever been made to feel like the silent, supporting character in the grand dramatic production of someone else's life. Before I begin this difficult, and I must confess, rather theatrical story, I would be so very grateful for your support. Please, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your kindness, your presence here, it is a great comfort. It gives this old woman the strength to finally step into the spotlight of her own memory and tell the story of the night she finally, and with the most profound and satisfying finality, took it back. Thank you, my dears. Thank you for that. My life, for 54 years, was a grand and beautiful love story. Or so I believed. His name was Arthur Sterling, and he was the most brilliant, most ambitious, and most charming man I had ever met. We met at a university mixer. I was a quiet, studious girl, studying art history, a girl from a good, but not particularly wealthy, Charleston family. He was a force of nature. A boy on a scholarship, from a poor town in the low country, with a mind like a steel trap, and a hunger to conquer the world that was as breathtaking as it was terrifying. He did not just want to be successful. He wanted to build an empire. And from the very first moment, he decided that I would be his queen. Our courtship was a whirlwind. He was not a man who believed in waiting for things. He believed in taking them. And he took my heart with a confidence and a certainty that left me breathless. We started with nothing. A tiny rented room in a rundown Charleston, single house. But we had a shared dream. He was a born salesman, a natural leader. And I had a small but significant inheritance from my grandmother. Not a great fortune, but enough. Enough for a beginning. He had an idea. A brilliant one. At that time, Charleston was a city of beautiful, fading ghosts. The grand old houses south of Broad Street were magnificent, but their interiors were often dark, heavy, and filled with the dark, heavy furniture of a bygone era. Arthur saw a niche. He wanted to start a business, a high-end antique and furniture restoration company. He didn't just want to sell furniture. He wanted to sell a lifestyle. The new, bright, elegant Charleston. He had the vision, the charm, the ambition. And I had the seed money. And I had the eye. I had the knowledge of history, of art, of what was real and what was merely a pretty fake. We were a perfect team. He was the brilliant, charismatic frontman. I was the quiet, steady, and knowledgeable foundation. I remember the day we signed the loan documents for our first little shop, just off King Street. We had used every penny of my inheritance as the down payment. It was a terrifying risk. I will never forget the look on his face as we walked out of the bank. He took my hands in his, and he looked at me with an intensity that was almost frightening. "You believe in me, Lillian," he'd whispered, his voice thick with an emotion that felt like raw, uncut gratitude. "You are the only person in the world who has ever truly believed in me, and I will spend the rest of my life repaying you for that. I will build you a kingdom, my love. I swear it." And he did. Ainsworth and Sterling, our little shop, became a staggering success. He was a brilliant marketer, a genius at finding wealthy clients from up north who wanted to buy a piece of the romantic, historic South. And I was the quiet, unseen engine of the business. I was the one who would spend weeks in dusty auction houses, the one who could spot a priceless original hidden under 100 years of grime. I was the one who managed the books, who hired the craftsmen, who made sure his grand, beautiful, and often chaotic vision was built on a solid, profitable foundation. For 20 years, we were a true and equal partnership. We bought our beautiful home, the one on the Battery. We had our son, our dear Arthur Jr. We built a beautiful, successful, and deeply, deeply happy life. I was not just his wife. I was his partner, his co-conspirator, his queen. The change, when it came, was not a sudden, violent earthquake. It was a slow, almost imperceptible continental drift. It began when the business grew beyond our wildest dreams, when Ainsworth and Sterling became a brand. He started traveling more, to London, to Paris, to auctions I could no longer attend. He started spending more time in a world that was not mine, a world of international finance, of powerful men who spoke a language I did not understand. He never stopped loving me, but he started editing me. He began to tell a new story about our life, a story that was simpler, more romantic, and more in line with the grand, heroic myth he was building for himself. "I was a poor boy with a dream," he would say, his voice a low, charming rumble that would captivate the entire table. "And I saw this beautiful, graceful Charleston belle, and I knew I had to build a world that was worthy of her. I built it all for her." It was a beautiful story, a romantic story, and it was a lie. He had not built it for me. He had built it with me. But the story of the brilliant, lone wolf, genius, was a better story than the quiet, complicated truth of a partnership. So that became the story. And I, in my love for him, in my desire to see him shine, I allowed it. I became a silent accomplice in my own erasure. I would sit at those dinner parties, smiling, as he told the story of his solitary genius, and I would feel a small, sharp, and deeply disloyal pang of pain in my heart. But I would say nothing. I told myself it didn't matter. I knew the truth. He knew the truth. That was all that mattered. I did not realize that a lie, told often enough, even to yourself, begins to feel like the truth. I did not realize that in erasing me from our past, he was also, slowly and methodically, erasing me from his present. And he was making a space, a quiet, hidden, and secret space in his life for someone else. The 30 years that followed were a masterclass in the art of the beautiful facade. From the outside, our life was a portrait of perfect, enviable success. Arthur Sterling was a legend in the world of antiques and historic restoration. Our home was featured in magazines. Our parties were the talk of the town. And I was the perfect, elegant, and utterly supportive wife. The quiet, graceful woman who stood just behind her great man, smiling her serene and increasingly practiced smile. My role in the business, once so central, was slowly, gently, and with the utmost loving respect, phased out. Arthur hired a team of brilliant young people, people with PhDs in art history and degrees in finance from the best universities. My quiet bookkeeping skills were no longer needed. My eye for a hidden treasure was replaced by a team of experts with auction catalogs and provenance reports. "Lillian, my love," he would say, his voice full of a fond, dismissive affection. "You have worked so hard for so many years. It is time for you to rest. It is time for you to enjoy the life I have built for you. You have earned your retirement." He did not see that he was not giving me a retirement. He was giving me a gilded cage. He was taking away my purpose, my partnership, my very identity. I was no longer the co-founder of Ainsworth and Sterling. I was simply Mrs. Arthur Sterling, a beautiful, well-kept, and increasingly lonely accessory to his grand life. And then, about 20 years ago, Elizabeth entered our lives. Her name was Elizabeth Finch. She was hired to be his new executive assistant. She was, in a word, a miracle of efficiency. She was brilliant. She was discreet. And she worshipped my husband, not with the blushing, girlish adoration of a young woman with a crush, but with the quiet, intense, and deeply unsettling devotion of a true believer. She saw him not as a man, but as a god. She dedicated her entire life to his comfort, his success, his every whim. She knew how he took his coffee. She knew which of his investors required flattery and which required brute force. She knew his schedule, his medications, his moods, better than I did. She was not his assistant. She was his high priestess. And Arthur, my brilliant, powerful, and profoundly egotistical Arthur, a man who had become so accustomed to being the sun in his own solar system. He thrived under her constant, unwavering, and utterly selfless devotion. She was not a partner to be negotiated with. She was a disciple to be commanded. And he, in his later years, found that he far preferred the company of a disciple. I was not jealous of her. Not at first. I was grateful. She made my life easier. She managed his travel, his schedule, the endless demands of his public life. She was the gatekeeper to my husband, and she was always so very polite, so very respectful to me. "Good morning, Mrs. Sterling," she would say, her voice a quiet, respectful murmur. "Mr. Sterling has a board meeting until noon, but he asked me to make sure you had the car at your disposal if you needed it for your garden club." She was always so thoughtful, so professional. The children grew up and moved away, building their own lives. Our son, Arthur Jr., became a doctor, a kind and gentle man who had no interest in the family business. And the house grew quieter. And Richard began to work later and later. The emergency business trips became more frequent. The late-night board meetings became a weekly occurrence. I was alone. So very, very alone, in that beautiful, silent, and increasingly lonely house. And Elizabeth was always there. At the office. By his side. Waiting. The moment of discovery, the moment the beautiful 50-year-long facade of my life shattered into a million irreparable pieces, was not a dramatic confrontation. It was a quiet, accidental, and utterly, soul-crushingly, mundane discovery. It was about 3 years ago. I was looking for a book in his study, a book of poetry he had loved. I couldn't find it on the shelves, and on an impulse, I opened the bottom drawer of his desk, a drawer he always kept locked. I found the key in its usual hiding place, in the back of his old silver cigarette case. Inside the drawer, beneath a pile of old, forgotten blueprints, was a small, leather-bound journal. It was not his usual work diary. The leather was soft, personal. My hands were trembling as I opened it. It was his private journal, a record of his other life. And it was all there. 20 years of it. The dinners, the hotels, the trips, the gifts, the lies. It was a meticulous, detailed, and utterly heartbreaking accounting of his long, secret love affair with Elizabeth Finch, his devoted, loyal, and ruthlessly efficient secretary. I read for hours, sitting there in his leather armchair, the only light in the room, the small lamp on his desk. And with every page, the man I had loved for 54 years, the man I had built a life with, the man who was the father of my children, dissolved into a stranger. A cruel, selfish, and profoundly deceitful stranger who had been living a double life right under my nose for 2 decades. The pain. Oh my goodness, the pain was a physical thing. It was a cold, heavy stone in my chest that made it impossible to breathe. It was not just the betrayal of his body. It was the betrayal of our history. He had not just shared his bed with her. He had shared our life. He had taken her to our favorite quiet inns in Vermont. He had bought her jewelry from the same Parisian artisan who had crafted my own. He had told her our stories, our private jokes, our shared secrets. He had given her my life. And the jewels. My God, the jewels. It was all there, in his neat, clear accountant's handwriting. A list of the pieces from my own private collection, my own history, that he had had copied over the years, replacing the real stones with fakes, and then gifting the real ones, my memories, my mother's pearls, my grandmother's ring, to her, his mistress. He was not just a cheat. He was a thief. He had been stealing from me, piece by piece, for 20 years. I sat in that silent room until the sun came up. And in the cold, gray light of dawn, the grief, the heartbreak, the shame, it all began to recede. And in its place, something else began to grow. Cold, quiet, and formidable anger. The anger of a queen who has just discovered a traitor in her court. A traitor who has not just stolen from the treasury, but who has tried to steal the very soul of the kingdom. I did not confront him. What would have been the point? He would have lied. He would have charmed his way out of it, as he always had. And he would have painted me as the hysterical, jealous wife. No, a confrontation was a game for amateurs. I was the daughter of a lawyer. I was the wife of a king. I understood the language of power, and I understood the quiet, brutal, and beautiful logic of a perfectly executed and long overdue revenge. He'd been living a secret life for 20 years. Fine dieting. I would begin to live my own. My war began that very morning. It was a war of paper, of patience, of quiet, meticulous, and legal preparation. While he was at the office with his mistress, I was on the phone with the finest, most ruthless, and most discreet divorce lawyer in the state of South Carolina. I did not tell him about the affair. I did not tell him about the jewels. I told him only one thing. "I want to know," I said, my voice as calm and as cold as the grave, "exactly what a 54-year partnership is worth." For the next 2 years, I played the part of the perfect, loving, and completely oblivious wife. I hosted his dinner parties. I admired his business acumen. I smiled my serene, empty smile. And all the while, my team of lawyers and forensic accountants was quietly, methodically, and with a terrifying precision dissecting his entire financial empire, piece by piece. They were creating an arsenal. I did not know when or how I would use it. But I knew that a man who has built his life on a foundation of such profound arrogance and deceit will eventually make a mistake. A single, public, and unforgivable mistake. And I, his quiet, devoted, and long-suffering wife, would be there, waiting, to turn that mistake into his own personal and very public execution. I just had to be patient. I had to wait for the perfect moment. And 2 years later, at my own son's wedding, he finally, beautifully, and with a staggering, suicidal arrogance, gave it to me. My son's wedding day was, by all accounts, the social event of the Charleston season. It was a masterpiece of planning, a testament to my husband's wealth and my daughter-in-law's impeccable taste. It was a perfect, beautiful, and exquisitely orchestrated lie. I floated through the day in a state of quiet, cold, and profound detachment. I was playing the most important role of my life, the proud, loving, and completely unsuspecting matriarch. I greeted the guests, my smile as warm and as bright as the Carolina sun. I made polite, meaningless conversation with people who had known me for 50 years and who had no idea that the woman they were speaking to was a stranger, a ghost haunting the shell of a 54-year marriage. My husband, my Arthur, was in his element. He was the king, holding court. He was magnificent. He was charming. He was witty. He was the picture of a proud, successful father. He moved through the crowd, a glass of champagne in his hand, a loving, proprietorial arm around my waist, and he accepted the congratulations of his friends. He was performing, and he was brilliant at it. And then I saw her. She was not there as a guest. She was there as an employee, the devoted, indispensable executive assistant, making sure her boss's perfect day went off without a hitch. It was a brilliant move, a masterstroke of quiet, arrogant power. She was hiding in plain sight, her presence so professional, so completely appropriate, that it was utterly and completely damning. I watched as my husband would occasionally, discreetly, catch her eye across the crowded room. He would give her a small, almost imperceptible nod, a secret, shared signal of command, and she would nod back, her face a mask of quiet, professional deference. They were a team, a well-oiled, ruthlessly efficient, and secret team conducting their business in the middle of my son's wedding. The audacity of it, it was breathtaking. The slow, public, and exquisitely crafted torture began during the cocktail hour. I was standing with a group of my oldest friends, women I had known since I was a girl, and Arthur brought her over. "Darlings," he boomed, his voice full of a warm, expansive charm. "You all know my indispensable Elizabeth, of course." My friends all smiled and murmured their polite hellos. "I swear," Arthur continued, with a grand theatrical laugh, "this woman knows my own mind better than I do. The company would fall apart without her. My entire life would fall apart without her." He placed a hand on Elizabeth's shoulder, a gesture of deep, fatherly, and utterly false affection. "She is a saint, a godsend, the best damn executive assistant in the state of South Carolina." He was praising his mistress, in front of his wife, in front of our oldest friends, and he was doing it in a way that was so clever, so completely deniable, that it was a masterpiece of public cruelty. He was telling the truth, but he was telling it in a language that only he and she and I could understand. I stood there, my smile frozen on my face, and I felt a wave of nausea so profound I thought I might be sick. I could feel my friends' eyes on me, their quiet, pitying concern. They didn't know the truth, but they knew something was wrong. They could feel the cold, ugly, and discordant note in the beautiful symphony of the day. But that was just the overture. The true performance was yet to come. It came, as it so often did in our life, during the toast. He stood at the head of the table, a vision of paternal pride and power. He gave a beautiful speech. It was witty, it was charming, it was emotional. He spoke of his love for his son, of his joy at welcoming his new daughter-in-law into the family. And then he turned to me. "And I must, of course," he said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate murmur that was meant for the entire room, "thank my beautiful wife of 54 years, my Lillian." He raised his glass to me. "She has been the quiet, steady, and beautiful foundation of my entire life. The heart of our home, the mother of our children, the most gracious hostess in all of Charleston." He paused, and he looked at me with a look of what the world would see as deep, abiding love. But what I saw was the cold, calculating eye of a master performer, setting the stage for his final, devastating line. "She is," he continued, his voice full of a fond and deeply dismissive affection, "a masterpiece of the domestic arts. And I say, with all the love in my heart, that she's the most brilliant, the most elegant, and the most wonderfully, beautifully, and completely useless business partner a man could ever ask for." Red. The room erupted in a wave of warm, appreciative laughter. It was the joke. The old, familiar, and beloved joke. The one he'd been telling for 30 years. The one that defined me. The one that erased me. My children, my dear, beloved children, were laughing the loudest. They looked at their father with such pride. They looked at me with such love. They had no idea they were applauding their own mother's public execution. And then, he did it. The one thing I had not anticipated. The one, final, arrogant, and suicidal mistake that would be his undoing. He turned from me, and he raised his glass to the corner of the room where Elizabeth was standing by the door, her clipboard in her hand, a silent, watchful, and efficient shadow. "But a king," he boomed, his voice ringing with a triumphant, magnanimous power, "is only as strong as his most trusted advisor. And I would be remiss if I did not also toast the woman who is the true secret to my success. The brilliant, the tireless, the utterly indispensable Miss Elizabeth Finch. Elizabeth, my dear, would you please stand?" And in that moment, as 200 pairs of eyes turned from me, the wife of 54 years, to her, the loyal secretary, something in the room shifted. The air grew cold. The beautiful, perfect, and exquisitely crafted lie that was my life, that was our marriage, was suddenly, and with a breathtaking arrogance, laid bare for all to see. He had not just praised his mistress. He had, in front of the entire world, replaced me. He had declared her, not me, to be the true secret weapon, the true partner. He had just handed me a loaded gun in the middle of a crowded room, and he had no idea that I was about to pull the trigger. I looked at my children. I saw the shock, the confusion, the dawning, ugly suspicion in their eyes. They were finally beginning to see. I looked at my husband. He was beaming, so proud of his own magnanimity, his own modern, enlightened praise for a loyal employee. He was a king so blinded by his own son that he could not see the eclipse that was about to happen. And I looked at her, standing there in her plain, dark suit, her face a mixture of feigned humility and raw, naked triumph. And on her wrist, I saw it, the delicate, beautiful, and very expensive diamond bracelet he had given her for her birthday. A bracelet I had seen on the company credit card statement just last week. The game was over. The time for quiet, patient, and secret preparation was done. It was time to bring the war out of the shadows and into the light. I pushed my chair back. The sound of its legs scraping against the polished floor was a small, sharp, and ugly sound in the midst of the stunned silence. I stood up. I picked up my champagne flute, and I took my knife from the table. And with a hand that was as steady and as solid as the foundation of my own house, I tapped the side of my crystal glass. Ting jana-cham. Ting ga-yo. Ting. Ring. The sound was not loud. But in that room, at that moment, it was a thunderclap. The murmurings died. The confused whispers stopped. Every single, solitary head in that grand, glittering ballroom turned back to look at me. The spotlight, which had been on him, was now, finally, and irrevocably, mine. I let the silence stretch. I let them all sit in that thick, terrible, and deeply uncomfortable quiet. I looked out at the sea of 200 stunned, silent faces. I saw my friends, their faces a mixture of shock and a dawning, terrible understanding. I saw my son, my dear Arthur Jr., his face pale, his eyes wide with a pain so profound it was as if he was seeing his entire childhood crumble into dust before his eyes. I saw his sister, my daughter, weeping silently into her hands. And I saw my husband. I saw a king, a great, powerful, and arrogant king, who had just realized, in a single, public, and catastrophic moment, that he was, in fact, completely and utterly naked. "Good evening," I began, and my voice did not shake. It was not the voice of a sentimental, useless old woman. It was the voice of the woman who had co-signed his first business loan. It was the voice of the woman whose name was on the building they were all sitting in. It was the voice of his 50% partner, and it was a voice he had not heard in 50 years. "I know," I continued, my voice calm and clear, ringing through that silent room, "that I am not on the program this evening. But my husband is right. He and I, we have a great many secrets, and I have decided on this most special and public of occasions to share one of them with you all." I let my gaze fall on Elizabeth, who seemed to shrink under the weight of it. "My husband is a brilliant man," I said, my voice as smooth as silk. "A visionary. And he is, above all, A generous man. So very, very generous. For 20 years, he has been a wonderful and generous employer to his devoted secretary, Miss Finch. So generous, in fact, that he has seen fit to provide her not just with a salary, but with a beautiful downtown apartment, with a new luxury car every 2 years, and with a collection of jewelry that would make a queen envious. I paused and looked directly at Elizabeth's wrist, at the glittering, damning diamond bracelet. "That is a beautiful piece you are wearing tonight, my dear," I said. "He has exquisite taste, doesn't he?" A wave of shocked, horrified murmurs went through the room. Elizabeth looked as though she was about to faint. "But his generosity," I continued, my voice now a blade of ice, "has come at a cost. You see, for 20 years, while he has been building his secret second life with Miss Finch, he has been funding it with a secret second source of income. He has been systematically, and I must say brilliantly, stealing from his business partner. The silent, trusting, and in his own word—" I paused, and I took a slow, deliberate sip of my champagne. "That business partner is me." I looked at my children, at their shattered, weeping faces. "My darlings," I said, and my voice was soft now, full of a deep and terrible sadness. "I am so sorry that you have to learn the truth this way. But the story your father has told you about his life, about our life, is a lie. The empire he built was not his alone. It was ours. And for the past 20 years, he has been using our shared fortune to betray our family and to betray me in the most profound and humiliating way imaginable." And then I turned to my husband, the man who was now just a hollowed-out shell of the king he had pretended to be. "So, Arthur," I said, my voice now devoid of any emotion at all. It was the voice of a CEO addressing a corrupt and disgraced employee. "I believe you have a choice to make. You can stand there and continue to lie, and we can all proceed to the ugliest, most public, and most financially devastating divorce this city has ever seen. A divorce in which my team of forensic accountants will lay bare every sordid, secret detail of your 20-year-long embezzlement." I raised my champagne flute. "I would like to propose a toast," I said, my voice ringing with a clear, cold, and terrible finality. "To my son and his beautiful new bride, and to their future." I looked directly at Arthur. "A future which will be funded, in its entirety, by a divorce settlement in which I receive not half, but 75% of our shared assets as punitive damages for 2 decades of fraud and emotional distress. And you, my dear, will be left with exactly what you started with 54 years ago. Nothing." I did not drink the toast. I simply placed my glass, very gently, on the table. And in the stunned, absolute, and tomb-like silence of that grand, glittering ballroom, I turned. I gathered my purse, and with my head held high, I walked, alone, away from the head table, past my weeping children, past the shattered, silent form of my husband, and out of that room and out of that life forever. I filed for divorce the very next day. He did not contest it. He had no fight left in him. The king had been dethroned, in front of his entire court. His myth, the myth he had spent a lifetime building, had been shattered in a single 5-minute speech. He was a broken man. The divorce was quiet, and it was absolute. I got everything I had asked for, not because I needed the money, but because it was a matter of justice. It was a balancing of the books. Elizabeth, his loyal, devoted Elizabeth, left him, of course. A king with no kingdom was of no use to her. I sold the old house. It was no longer a home. It was a crime scene. I sold my half of the business. I was done with that world. And I built this new life, for myself. A quiet life. A life where I am the only one telling my story. My children, we are healing. The truth was a terrible, bitter medicine for them to swallow. But they are good children. They are strong. And they are, for the first time, seeing their mother not as a quiet, supportive footnote, but as the author of her own life. I learned the hardest lesson a woman can learn, that a lie, no matter how beautiful, is a cage, and that the truth, no matter how painful, is the only thing that can ever truly set you free. My husband did not just cheat on me. He erased me. He made me a ghost in my own life, a quiet, domestic, and utterly predictable footnote to his own grand story. And my final toast, my final, terrible, and triumphant speech, it was not an act of revenge. It was a resurrection. The resurrection of the woman I had been, the woman I had forgotten, the woman who was anything but useless. So, if you are out there, and you are living in the shadow of someone else's grand story, please remember this old woman. You are not a footnote. You are a story of your own. And your truth is the most powerful, most valuable, and most beautiful thing you will ever own. Do not be afraid to use it. Thank you for letting me share this very public, private story with you. It is a good reminder, I think, that it is never too late to steal the spotlight in your own life. If you have found strength in this story, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and press that little notification bell so you don't miss what comes next. And in the comments below, I would love for you to share a story about a time when you found the courage to speak your own, unvarnished truth. Love you all. This is Grandma Lillian, and I'll see you in the next story.